When I say the word, probably a different image comes into everybody's head. It might be an image of their son or daughter, of their niece or nephew, of a neighbour or somebody in their community, maybe of a student that they teach or somebody that they work with. If not, maybe it's something more stereotypical, a very distressed child, or maybe even Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory. And that's not a bad thing. It gives us something to reference. It gives us something to reflect on. But I guess we've come a long way in a short period of time. Because when I was first diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, a form of autism, when I was 4.5 years old, most people had never heard of the word, and fewer people still thought they knew anybody else with the condition. We've gone from that point to a point where 86% of autistic children now attend mainstream school. And not only that, most people have heard the word and can point to somebody in their family or in the community who's on the autism spectrum. We've truly become an autism-aware country. And that's great. Awareness is really important. Awareness is an important first step. But it is only a first step. Because you see, there's a big difference between awareness and understanding. And the reason I know this is because I'm aware of a lot of things that I don't understand. I'm aware that French is a language, but I don't speak it. So I'm not much use to anyone who only understands or who only speaks that language. I'm also aware of that because I think as we've mainstreamed more autistic people into the community, we've done it in a very Irish way, which is we're going to move all these people into the community, but we're not going to talk about it. And I suppose I saw this firsthand growing up, because often if you decide to tell somebody you're on the autism spectrum, or someone found out you're on the autism spectrum, people would absolutely want to do the right thing. But you'd briefly see this look of sheer panic, followed by, I better do something. So you'd notice people talking a little bit slower, or sometimes doing what we all do on holidays, and just speaking a little bit louder, which didn't really achieve much. And why is this important? Because if we're serious about autism inclusion, we have to be serious about all truly understanding what it means to have autism. So what is autism? The definition is that autism is a lifelong developmental condition that relates to how a person communicates and interacts with other people and how they experience the world around them. Autism is a spectrum, and that means that every single person with the condition is a little bit different, in the same way that everybody in this room is different. Autism is really a set of differences. Sometimes when we talk about it, we just talk about deficits, or we just kind of look at the person in front of us and kind of make a snag list and try and work through it. But that doesn't really work very well. When we talk about autism, there's challenges, but there's also strengths. So what are the challenges? Some autistic people, put simply, may communicate a little bit differently, may think a little bit differently, or may experience the environment a little bit differently to people who are not on the autism spectrum. What does that mean? It may mean that some autistic people communicate other than using words, or may understand language exactly as it's written on the page. And my God, if you have that challenge, Ireland is probably the worst possible country that you can live in. That can mean that it can be difficult to be understood or to understand other people. Autistic people may find it hard to predict what's going to happen next. So before you came this evening, you probably didn't know exactly what all the speakers looked like, or nobody sat up and read out a list of social rules before the event began. But most people were able to fill in the gaps. Before you came, you probably guessed there were going to be chairs. You probably guessed there'd be stages. You knew that when the speakers began to speak, you might have to be quiet and listen, that people would need to face this direction, that there'd probably be lights and a camera. You were able to fill in the blanks, using the zoom on your camera to see the bigger picture, based on previous experiences that you'd had. When you're an autistic person, that zoom doesn't always work as well. And that means that every social situation can be a little bit stressful, can be a little bit hard to predict. And what that means is you can be anxious all of the time because you don't know what's going to happen next. And it also means sometimes you can put your foot in it in social situations. In addition, when we talk about the environment, the way autistic people perceive the environment can be very different. That might mean that every noise, every sound, every smell, every texture hits the person at once in the environment, making it hard to concentrate, making it hard to sit still, and sometimes making it very overwhelming and stressful. Also, unfortunately, when you're experiencing all of these differences, but you don't look any different to anyone else, and you don't necessarily wear a t-shirt announcing that you're on the autism spectrum, sometimes instead of getting understanding and support, people jump to their own conclusions. And they just say, that person's odd, or that person's weird, or that person's strange. But we can talk about the challenges that autistic people face, but unfortunately we don't spend enough time talking about the benefits and the positives of seeing the world in a different way. So what if I told you that because you take in lots of information at once, you're able to notice detail that other people may not see at all, which is why so many autistic people play very important roles in science, in technology, in the arts. What if I told you that most autistic people can have one intense special interest that the person can learn everything about and become an expert in? That would mean that the person can probably be better at the things they are good at than a person who is not on the autism spectrum. It also means you have people who can make a phenomenal contribution as employees in society. What if I told you that yes, black and white thinking, right or wrong, literal thinking, something that can be challenging for autistic people, also meant that autistic people could be hugely loyal and hugely honest. And in the world we live in today, that's probably a positive thing. But in addition, if you're a person who every single day to get the bus or to walk down a corridor or to sit in a classroom in school has to actively think about how you're going to manage that experience because it's so overwhelming. From the time you're a very young child, you have to become a problem solver. And we need problem solvers in our world. We need people who think a little bit differently. So what this begs us to question is, where do the challenges of autism really come from? Because yes, absolutely, some come from the fact that you're autistic. Some aspects of being autistic can make life a little bit harder. But many of the challenges of autism are man-made. They're not part of the diagnostic criteria. They're to do with how society chooses to respond to people on the autism spectrum. Because let's just imagine for a second, what would it be like right now if without any warning, without any explanation, without any preparation or context, you were picked up and dropped in a completely different city and expected to go to work? Imagine trying to communicate with people who spoke a different language to you. Imagine trying to predict workplace culture and what was expected of you in a totally different culture to the one you grew up in. Imagine trying to navigate an environment where everything just seemed unfamiliar and a little bit stressful. It wouldn't be easy, but it also wouldn't be your fault. It would just be a case that you were experiencing the world and thinking in a little bit of a different way to most people. And what is that? That's accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, we often think of wheelchair ramps and lifts. But I firmly believe autistic people face accessibility barriers every single day in terms of how the world works. Accessibility in terms of how people communicate, in terms of being able to predict social situations and go new places, in terms of being able to cope with often a very busy environment in public spaces, and yes, sadly, in terms of the judgment and attitude of other people who may not understand. What does this mean? This means that an autistic person isn't able to go to a shop or enjoy a meal or go for a night away in a hotel because everything's just too busy and stressful. It means that an autistic person may really want to get a job and may really have the skills to do the job, but an interview process that's built in unpredictability is never going to work very well. And it also means that an autistic person who might really try every day to cope and to adapt to the world is just unable to be accepted because they do things a little bit differently. So this is not inevitable. It's also not deliberate. And the solutions aren't necessarily rocket science. But we urgently need to take action because the societal barriers of autism are causing a huge crisis in the autism community. And this becomes ever more important as we see the first generation of people mainstreamed through the education system, reaching adulthood. 56% of autistic adults in Liverpool said that they were afraid to leave their own home. 80% of autistic people are either unemployed or underemployed. And the societal barriers of autism are one of the definitive factors in the reality that autistic people on average are dying 16 years younger than non-autistic people, even though there's no physiological reason for why this should be the case. So what can we do? I decided to set up an organization called AsIAm because I believed we could build an autism-friendly society. What does that look like? It's a society that makes small changes to meet autistic people in the middle. What is an autism-friendly society? It's a society which accepts people as they are and which ensures that autistic people are able to participate in every single aspect of the community. The organisation was founded 5 years ago, and we've worked with a wide range of organisations, businesses, public services around the country. But I always wanted to prove that it was possible to create an autism-friendly community, that we could make these small changes and still do business, and our public services could operate even more efficiently, and people could still go about their day, most of the time not even aware of the small changes that have been made. And I'm proud to say that we're now on the cusp of designating Ireland's first autism-friendly town in Clonakilty, County Cork. So how did that come about? 3 years ago, a local autism activist walked into Scally's SuperValu in Clonakilty and said, going to the supermarket can be a really stressful experience for autistic people. You're getting so much information at once. There's irritating music on in the background, there's noisy fridges, there's bright lights, there's lots of smells, and people just can't do it. A mundane task people don't have to think about most of the time is causing huge distress. So this amazing shop said, well, we're going to take action. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk to the community and find out what could we do to make the experience a little bit easier. And what that led to was a weekly quiet time. And it was something very simple, where once a week for 2 hours, they reduced the lighting, turned off the music, and tried to keep disruption to an absolute minimum. It sounds very simple, but it was about much more than shopping. It moved autism outside of the school gate for the first time, and reminded us that actually autistic people need to do the same things in the community as everybody else. And what happened very quickly is that SuperValu nationally got on board, and over 120 stores around the country began to offer this service. But the story didn't end there. We began to build on how can we make that even easier. We created predictability materials, like noises of what the store sounds like, and a sensory map of where to avoid particular triggers within the sensory environment. This helped people to prepare for their trip. And then we said, how can we really build on that again? And lucky in the community of Clonakilty, we were working with a very vibrant community that really wants to work together and make things work. So we were set a challenge earlier this year by SuperValu. Could we create the first autism-friendly community in Clonakilty? Now, autism-friendly, it's kind of something on topic at the moment. There's a lot of interest in it. And sometimes there's that real risk that it becomes a bit of a buzzword. But what was particularly exciting is we weren't asked to just go and work in the town. We were asked to tell the community of Clonakilty what they needed to do to be autism-friendly. That really important principle of nothing about us without us was followed. And from that, we developed a framework for what an autism-friendly town would look like. We visited the town, and like any community, it had shops and public services and voluntary organisations and hotels and restaurants. And we made a list and we divided them into categories. And we then said that in each category, we'd need a certain percentage of organisations to sign up and to commit to make a few small changes that would make a big difference. And what were those changes? Number one, to commit to training, because knowledge is power, and people being able to empathise makes a big difference. Number two, let one of our evaluators visit your organisation. We'll pinpoint a few areas that might cause difficulty in the environment, and if you make one change, that could be really helpful. Number three, we'll develop a visual guide that tells a person what to expect from the moment they walk in to the moment they leave, so it reduces anxiety and makes it easier for an autistic person to try new things. And finally, be accepting of assistance dogs, because some members of our community really can't go out without the support of these amazing animals. In addition, we recognised that being autism-friendly is a journey. It's not a destination. It's about a constant dialogue between the autism community and the community at large about how we can build a bridge and work together. That's why we've challenged the town to develop a plan over the next 3 years for how it can become more autism-friendly on an ongoing basis. This is an ambitious plan that covers everything from improving the physical environment with things like visual signage and a sensory garden, to creating a work experience program to support autistic people into work. This is so important, and we believe it's a model that we can bring throughout the country to really create a more inclusive society for autistic people. But why is it important? Why does it matter to people who don't have any direct connection to the condition? Well, the reason that it matters is that autistic people and their families are currently cut off from our society. And that isn't acceptable in any modern society. But beyond that, this is a very cold statistical argument. If you consider autistic people and their family members, we're talking about a minimum of 243,000 people in Ireland, just under 250,000 people. Why would we design businesses, our community groups, our public services, with that large a group of people left out? That's bad for business, that's bad for efficiency, and that's bad for the community. Being autism-friendly is good for autistic people, but it's good for business and it's good for society. What will your community do to help the 1 in 65 people in Ireland on the autism spectrum? Thank you.